Hi, my name is Autif Kamal. This is another workshop on logic and reasoning. This one is on implied contradictory assumptions, or I also call them contradictory categorical assumptions. If you have any questions or comments, you can relay them to me via Skype. My username is autif.kamal, or email. My email address is projectoptimization@gmail.com. Alright, so I would say one benefit of a contradictory categorical assumption is that, just like with a contrary categorical assumption, it dramatically changes the wording of just a plain categorical assumption. And just like a contrary categorical assumption, both a contradictory and just plain categorical assumption are true at the same time. And the reason why you would want to dramatically change the wording of a categorical assumption via a contradictory categorical assumption is because that dramatically changed wording may lead you to question that assumption, whereas maybe a categorical or contrary categorical assumption may not lead you to question it. That's what I would say would be the reason for going into how to formulate a contradictory categorical assumption. Here is an example for you. So the original argument is the customer tipped the waiter because the waiter provided exceptional customer service. So first, the categorical assumption would be this customer tips every waiter who provides exceptional customer service, because if this customer tips this waiter because that waiter provided exceptional customer service, then it would make sense that this customer would tip every waiter that provides the same exceptional customer service. Okay, and this is what you'd get for the contradictory categorical assumption. You'd get there was not at least one waiter who this customer did not tip for exceptional customer service. Now, a contradictory categorical assumption is not contradictory in terms of it's wholly contradicting either the proposition or the categorical assumption, because a contradictory categorical assumption and a plain categorical assumption will be true at the same time. The sense in which a contradictory categorical assumption is contradictory to a just plain categorical assumption is in the following ways. In this contradictory categorical assumption, you'll notice that it says there was not at least one. That would only contradict every, would not contradict the entire assumption, the entire categorical assumption. And you'll notice that in the contradictory categorical assumption it says did not tip. That single portion would contradict only tips in the categorical assumption. It's only in those particular ways that the contradictory categorical assumption is contradictory to the categorical assumption, and that is why I call this type of assumption a contradictory categorical assumption. Okay, and also you'll notice that both of those assumptions are true at the same time. If you say that there was not at least one waiter who this customer did not tip for exceptional service, then that means this customer tips every waiter for exceptional customer service, which is exactly what the categorical assumption says. And that's how those two different formulations of the same assumption are equivalent in meaning to each other. Okay? Now here's an example for you to do on your own. The argument is takeoff is a problem for a heavily loaded aircraft because it needs more power. So what you're going to do is first formulate the categorical assumption, the plain categorical assumption. After you do that, based on that formulation, you should also formulate the contradictory categorical assumption. Okay? If you need more time, you can pause this video. Otherwise, I will move on to the answers, which I will do right now. So first, the categorical assumption you get is every heavily loaded aircraft needs more power for takeoff. So if it's the case that a single heavily loaded aircraft needs more power to take off, then it should be the case that every heavily loaded aircraft, every equally heavily loaded aircraft, would also need more power for takeoff. So this is the contradictory categorical assumption that we get. There is not a heavily loaded aircraft which does not need more power to take off. So there is not a heavily loaded aircraft would be directly contradictory to every heavily loaded aircraft, and does not need more power would be contradictory to more power to take off, or for takeoff. Okay, and also, just like the first example that I gave you, these two assumptions are true simultaneously. So if there is not a heavily loaded aircraft which does not need more power for takeoff, then that means that every heavily loaded power does need more power for takeoff. Okay. Now, if you'd like more practice on formulating contradictory categorical assumptions, as I've said many times in the past, you can go to books like google.com, type in a keyword, particularly one that interests you, select a book. You want to select a book that has a preview available or is a free Google ebook. Within the book that you choose, you want to do a search. You want to search for because, and then you want to search for simple simple cause and effect sentences, and then you would either formulate it by taking it directly from the text, or you would use what you're reading as inspiration to formulate your own cause and effect sentences. Then, as I've done here, you want to formulate a categorical assumption. Then based on that, you want to formulate a contradictory categorical assumption. Also, before I continue to the end of this workshop, I just want to emphasize that the reason why you would formulate a contradictory categorical assumption is just to make you aware of an assumption, of whether you should question the assumption. So when it says there is not a heavily loaded aircraft which does not need more power to take off, that should prompt you. You should use that as a prompt to question you: is there a heavily loaded aircraft which does not need power to take off? Okay, so you would use a contradictory categorical assumption as a prompt to actually question whether there is a heavily loaded aircraft which does not need more power to take off. And formulating a contradictory categorical assumption is just a more explicit way of prompting you to ask that question. Okay, I just wanted to give emphasis for that, for the justification of formulating a contradictory categorical assumption. Okay, so next up we'll go into conditional assumptions. And we would be going into conditional assumptions just for the sake of emphasizing the cause and effect. And I'll go into greater detail in that in the next workshop. Alright, thank you.